Welcome, everybody. This is Across the Atlantic. We provide actionable insight at the intersection of geopolitics and capital markets. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Rush. Andrew is the co-founder, president, CEO, and board chairman of Starcatcher, where he leverages extensive executive leadership and technical expertise to spearhead the development of the world's first orbital energy grid. By delivering power as a service to spacecraft in low Earth orbit, Starcatcher is addressing the primary constraint of the modern space economy: energy density. A recognized leader in the aerospace industry, Andrew has a proven track record of scaling transformative space companies from early-stage ventures to publicly traded entities. He previously served as president and COO of Redwire Corporation, where he led the company through its public listing and oversaw the integration of a diverse portfolio of space infrastructure and technology businesses. Under his leadership, the company successfully deployed flight-proven solutions for civil, commercial, and national security missions, including pioneering work in in-space manufacturing and satellite power systems. Prior to his role at Redwire, he was the president and CEO of Made in Space, Inc., a pioneer in in-space manufacturing and assembly technologies. Beyond his corporate leadership, Andrew is a key voice in space policy and governance. He has served as a member of the Technology, Innovation, and Engineering Committee, a standing committee of the NASA Advisory Council, or NAC, supporting the advisory needs of the NASA Administrator, the Office of the Chief Technologist, and NASA Mission Directorates. Previously, Andrew served as chair of the NAC Regulatory and Policy Committee. Andrew began his career as an intellectual property attorney and as a physicist. He holds a Juris Doctor from Stetson College of Law and a Bachelor of Science in Physics from the University of North Florida. An advocate for the long-term sustainability of the space environment, he's a frequent speaker on the evolution of space infrastructure and the commercialization of low Earth orbit. Andrew, my gosh, what a background. Thank you so much for joining me. Let me know if I missed anything there, my friend.
Oh, no. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Garrett. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, I like to kick these conversations off, obviously just casual, but do a bit of scene setting, of course. So obviously, given your background, I think it's fairly obvious what we're going to be chatting about today: space. Obviously, a complex and growingly complex arena for both geopolitics and markets. Space is rapidly becoming the decisive strategic domain of the 21st century. The global space economy reached roughly $626 billion in 2025. It is on track to surpass $1 trillion by 2034, driven by explosive commercial growth in satellites, broadband, and in-orbit infrastructure. Yet, this boom is unfolding amid intensifying great power rivalry. China is launching satellites at record pace, expanding its Tiangong space station, and advancing toward a crewed lunar landing by 2030 in partnership with Russia. While Moscow develops nuclear anti-satellite capabilities, even as its broader space program declines, the U.S. leads with unmatched commercial innovation in initiatives like the Artemis Accords, now signed by over 60 nations, but faces mounting counter space threats and the urgent need for resilient power, mobility, and traffic management in an increasingly congested orbital environment. This is the high-stakes landscape where national security, economic leadership, and the next industrial revolution beyond Earth will be won or lost. So, no pressure at all. So, Andrew, that's kind of the scene that we find ourselves in, but I know I just rambled a lot. Always like to get it from the folks. Can you just give us a bit of your background, where you started and how you got to Starcatcher?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I started my career, my technical background in physics and the law. I was a patent lawyer for a number of years and focused on space companies and 3D printing companies. And as many folks know, actually, being a lawyer can actually be fairly entrepreneurial, and was working with the folks at Made in Space, and then actually came to run Made in Space. Grew that company to about 140 folks, about 40 or 50 million in revenue, and then sold that to Redwire, and then helped grow that company and take that company public. And now Redwire is a multi-billion-dollar firm with sites all over the globe. And really, my personal and professional motivation is to enable us to do more in space, enable us to do new things in space. I'm a deep believer in the transformational capacity that space has for our national economy and the key role that it plays from a national and global security perspective.
Perfect. And I think this will help out a lot of folks, honestly, Andrew, myself included. But when we talk about, and we're going to probably throw around some acronyms here, I imagine. But just to level set, so when we're talking about space, we're really talking about a few different levels, and this is honestly something that I've had to learn. But if you could just help folks out that are not familiar with the space at all, maybe some investors, other corporates out there, et cetera, if you can just explain like super high level what LEO is, what MEO is, GEO, and I know there might be some others, but what
Yeah.
exactly are these?
So you can think of space as having different neighborhoods. And historically, the two very popular neighborhoods for us were what we called geosynchronous orbit, which is, tens of thousands of kilometers away, and your satellite kind of stays over the same spot of the Earth on the Earth all the time. And that's one neighborhood. The other neighborhood is LEO, low Earth orbit. So that's about 100 150 kilometers above the Earth's surface to maybe about 1,500 kilometers above the Earth's surface. And the really interesting thing is, um, although the satellites in GEO, they sit over the same spot and make it really easy for us to observe that static spot or transmit, telecommunications back and forth. It only gives you access to that one area. And so what we've seen is a renewed interest in a proliferation of satellites in low Earth orbit now, because that gives us the ability to build constellations of satellites to do Earth observation, to do telecommunications, and also that's where our human crewed space stations are based, both the International Space Station and China's space station.
Excellent. Again, I think a lot of that is it gets lost. You can get lost in the weeds with like a lot of this stuff really quickly. So I think so I think level setting like that is incredibly helpful for a lot of folks out there, capital market stakeholders, and all the different folks out there. So we mentioned this at the outset, developments from near peer rivals, namely, and I think kind of obviously, China, but then followed pretty closely by Russia as well. So Andrew, as you sit here as an expert in the industry and having experienced and lived it for decades and years, what do you think of developments? I think namely to China's independent Tiangong space station. Now, for folks out there, and Andrew, tell me if I'm off on any of this, but from my understanding, it's a totally separate, obviously, from the International Space Station, which is shared by at an international level by many countries, as the name implies. So what do you think of those developments and others? I also think to the joint mission that I know China and Russia have. And then I think even further to what's going on with the Artemis Accords and national plans for moon bases, which kind of sounds silly at first glance, but then this is stuff that's actually being talked about by NASA and other space agencies out there.
Yeah. So space is in many ways the final frontier, right? And an infinite frontier in terms of resource and capability. And we started the first great golden age of space in the 60s, via great power competition with the Soviet Union. And in many ways a kind of demonstration of strength, but through peaceful means. Demonstration of our ability to build large rockets that could put humans on the moon, and could also put thermonuclear weapons on our enemies.
Yeah.
And that drove so much scientific discovery and exploration and inspiration. But ultimately, that first golden age kind of fizzled because it was just based on this great power competition. And after we had demonstrated our technical prowess, we kind of moved on as a nation. We now live in the second golden age of space. But that second golden age is not just underpinned by great power competition. It's underpinned by the very real recognition that space is essential for national security, and that our economy is indelibly and permanently tied to space. Like our entire global banking system relies on accurate timing information from satellites.
Right.
Our so much of our consumer economy is based on that GPS signal, so much and based on remote sensing imagery that we get from commercial providers, like Planet, for instance. And we're in this second golden age of space that's underpinned not just by great power competition, but also by commercial activity. And we're seeing infrastructure being built now that enables more and more commercial activity, but also makes it to where, from a national security perspective and a global security perspective, we can be that much more capable. And it is crucial to our geopolitical position in the world to have a robust and growing space segment. It's also crucial from an economic perspective that you mentioned earlier that that there are projections that say we're going to be at $1 trillion as a space economy by 2034. I actually think that's wildly conservative.
Oh, wow. Okay. Good.
We're
Earlier.
right. I think it's going to be earlier. We're at 15,000 satellites or something in space today, right? We're going to be at 50,000 plus by the end of the decade, and that's to say nothing of how things like orbital data centers, how things like direct-to-cell connectivity are driving utilization of space even more, and really tying more of what we're doing on a daily basis to live and work and play and interact with one another, and delivering that connectivity and those products and services via some space segment.
I love that. And I also love to, just to linger here for a second, like, I mean, we talked about like in the past, it was pretty much just the domain of governments.
Right.
But it's super exciting to see now, for a confluence of reasons, I'm sure, private companies being able to exert their goals, ambitions, missions into this new arena. Obviously, I think like a lot of that probably has to do with price, and it's becoming less expensive, and everything else. I mean, used to cost millions upon millions of dollars to spend a rocket to space, and now it's changed. So, yeah, I think that's a piece that not a lot of folks think about, especially in our daily lives, right? So it's like we all use these things. Again, you named banks, data, information, etc. But that's all what we think about it now. And as we enter the second golden age, as you describe it, and I agree with you, by the way, it'll be really interesting and cool for Multitude, both on the commercial side and on the government side, what we're able to do with that now that things are cheaper, technology is more advanced. So the capabilities on both of those two buckets, what we'll be able to achieve, I think, is incredibly exciting. Something that I know that you're working on over at Starcatcher as well. So Andrew, I mentioned the Artemis Accords as well. Obviously, this is a U.S.-led initiative. But ultimately, what do you think the goal here is? And this is a question that I get from a lot of my folks of like, okay, great. Like, it's really cool to see it. It's I think, a big technical feat.
Yeah.
Very, I think, inspiring to go back in a meaningful way to space and the moon, et cetera. And I know there's plans for further out in Artemis 3 and beyond. But what is the ultimate goal, do you believe, in your eyes? Are we like, is it a manned mission to Mars? Is it a like permanent base? Like, I
Yeah.
would love to know. Yeah.
I think the ultimate goal of the Artemis program as it stands today is the on the face of it goal is a permanent human presence on the moon.
Okay.
We all of my children, I have three boys, the oldest is 16. All of my children have lived every single day of their lives where a person has been living and working in space, which is like a really amazing thing when you just pause and think about that like we as a country,
Yeah.
we as a global species like have that capability. And so the next great step there is a permanent human presence on another celestial body.
Yeah.
And the thing that first bit that because what I was referencing is people have been on the International Space Station since 2000,
Right.
in a permanent, continuously. And the International Space Station actually gave birth to this second golden age of space in many ways. Like, the thing that has really driven the commercial revolution in space has been the reduction of launch cost and the increased availability of launch. Every satellite that goes to space, is constrained by SWAP, size, weight, and power.
Hmm.
And the kind of the actual twin revolutions of the emergence of reusable launch vehicles brought down launch costs by like an order of magnitude, and also the revolution of smartphones, which gave us all these really really capability dense electronics, has enabled us both to shrink the size of satellites and to put them up more cheaply. And so that's how we've gotten amazing imagery from commercial providers, amazing, connectivity now from other folks. And that has driven this commercial revolution that, we talk about, competition with near peer adversaries, or actually we have this structural advantage of leveraging the entrepreneurial spirit
100%. Yeah.
to expand these capabilities. And so on its face, the goal of Artemis is, all hands together, permanent
Right.
human presence on the moon. That's also going to cause yet another revolution in activity in space by driving new technology into the fore and driving down the cost of that and giving us reasons to put more infrastructure up. And then that infrastructure people layer on top applications that then act as just a flywheel that lets us build more and more and more and drive things forward. Now, whether that's going to be moon mining one day,
Right.
or hotels, or just remote sensing and telecommunications and those sorts of things, I personally think it's an all of the above.
Yeah.
It's just a time phasing kind of thing.
Yeah, I would agree. And it sounds, I think about it as we're chatting. I was like, well, it kind of sounds silly to talk about hotels, but it's like, is it really? Because what was silly to us, 20 years ago, right
Right.
now in 2026 is absolutely not silly at all.
Right.
And that
Well,
timeline,
it's a
yeah,
time phasing thing, right?
right,
Like
right.
jumping straight to hotels on the moon is silly, but
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 eventually,
going but
yeah,
going like going you know going from great expeditions on the planet
right,
to expeditions in low Earth orbit and on the International Space Station. Well, people are doing that now.
right,
So
right.
we're just going to expand, we have a demonstrated demand for that, and people doing that. And we can just expand that, and then and then one day some billionaire will have an expedition to go be on an igloo on the moon, and then maybe one day like my children might be able to sell their homes and go vacation on a Hilton on the moon. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Wow. I'm waiting for that day as well, man. Also, Hilton, if they want to expand out to space. That'd be really cool.
I
New,
got some buddies that can help. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, new arena for them. That's incredible. Well, nice. Okay, fantastic. And I know this kind of like dovetails as well, this whole conversation, right? Of, we're talking about the Artemis programs and like what the ultimate goal is. Great. Now that's obviously all on the government side, right?
Right.
Ultimately, and we're seeing some of this now. I think probably more now than ever, but that's my layman's take on it. I'm sure you probably know better than myself. The relationship that the government has, whether that's the DoD or anything else, but the government and commercial space enterprises. How do you view that relationship as it stands today in 2026, Andrew? And then what do you think that looks like as we head into the future?
Yeah, I think from a relationship between commercial space and national security space, that relationship has never been more intimate and has never been more essential.
Yeah,
You know,
agreed.
we are we are saying loudly the things that we used to whisper 5 and 10 years ago about space being a contested domain and space being an essential domain for national and global security. And we are shouting, our customers are shouting that they need and are willing to rely upon and are willing to work closely and lean forward into commercial solutions. Whereas 5 years ago, they were 5 and 10 years ago, that was a little bit more of a jump ball
Yeah,
in terms of the willingness there. And it comes at exactly the right moment, right?
right.
That we really are, there's hotspots around the world in very serious ways, and it is leveraging something that is unique about our American enterprise to its greatest effect.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's 100% accurate. And I think more generally too, at a high level, there's a real focus on a shift back towards the real economy. And what I mean by that is a focus on energy, American industrials, American, metals and mining, the foundational building blocks
Yeah.
of the economy. And in my mind, and I think a lot of others, you could also throw private space enterprise in there as well. So I think that makes an incredible amount of sense, especially as it relates to timing, as it relates to the necessity of that relationship and expanding and everything else. So that's super insightful, Andrew. Appreciate that. So this might be also a space, one that I certainly don't know a whole lot about, but the debris and managing that in space. So, as I understand it, there's a rise in commercial payloads, obviously, as we're talking about the rise of private space enterprise. Um, how do you see it right now? How sustainable are current regulatory and operational models for managing that space traffic and debris?
So space traffic management is important, and space debris management and mitigation is something that we need. It's not quite as big of an issue as people make it out to be. Though
Okay.
this
See,
is
in my
not a,
mind, it's like it's a really big deal. So this is
yeah, yeah,
good.
yeah. Yeah. So you often see these graphics
Yeah.
online. People
Yeah.
show like the Earth in 1972, and they're like, "Oh, look, there's there's no satellites, or there's one satellite, or whatever." And
Yeah.
they show this picture that's like today, and they put like 15,000 pixels
Yeah.
around the, and they're like, "Oh my God, I can barely see the Earth. This is like
Yeah.
this seems so unsustainable." That's a trick of scaling though, because if you actually had satellites that were actual size to show up as a pixel and like with the Earth behind them, they'd be the size of like the Empire State Building. Um, and that's not reality.
Yeah.
Like the reality is that satellites are the size of mid-sized cars, if you're lucky. And the carrying capacity for low Earth orbit is is actually more like 1 million satellites or
Oh
more
wow.
than the 10,000 plus that we have. Now,
Oh
that
wow.
doesn't mean that people don't have to change their orbit to avoid space debris. It doesn't
Right.
mean that this isn't something that we need to be concerned about. And it does absolutely mean that we need to apply the lessons painfully learned in the past where we have had a tragedy of the commons to space, right? Like
Yeah.
the pollution that exists in our oceans, the Pacific garbage patch, these things are real
Yeah.
because we just dumped into what felt like an infinite frontier at the time, and it turned out wasn't. Low Earth orbit and our LEO, MEO, GEO more
Yeah.
broadly is the same. Right now, there isn't really a payer for somebody to go clean it up, right? Like our local municipalities pay contractors to clean up our garbage, clean up our streets. We don't have that for space. And until we have a payer, it's still going to be a problem.
Yeah. And it's so on two of those fronts, I think that's interesting, right? So, because you're right. I mean, you use the analogy of, just the ocean and trash and garbage out there. And it's like, well, we thought it was infinite at the time. Turns out it wasn't. Space literally does feel infinite because we define that space as infinite all the time. So, it does feel like that sometimes. But as you say, there's different levels and different
Right.
carrying capacities for those levels. Obviously, Leo being probably the most attainable, right? Because it's the closest to Earth. Um, that's interesting. Okay, that's really good to know too. And you're right. I mean, I have seen those videos and I have seen those models of look back to 1960, 1970, whatever, 80. And there's not that much. There's like 10, 15, whatever. And then now you look and it looks incredibly busy. It looks, I think I'm just like, how do we even launch anything out of here? I mean, it's wild. So it's incredibly, I think, you don't know unless you're in the industry, and I'm not, and I'm definitely learning, but this is why we have these conversations. It's great. So Andrew, as we move forward, what kind of legislative or defense policy changes would you like to see to support both the national security and commercial innovation in space? And maybe, the answer is none. Maybe you think we're already doing a good job. Again, I asked this question as a layman, not knowing anything.
Yeah.
So would love to get your insight there.
S- Compared to when I started my career, with Made in Space,
Yeah.
the like honestly the regulatory and kind of defense policy environment is incredibly friendly. that doesn't mean that we should stop.
Right.
There from a defense policy perspective, there is this, as we talked about earlier, there's this active recognition that commercial solutions are, are appropriate and are at the right time scale to meet the need, right? That some of the old ways of doing things, just don't fit a 21st century hot war or potential hot war, especially in the advent of all the new kind of paradigms that we've seen, with drones and AI and offensive space. So really, it's putting more wood behind those arrows. Like
Right.
it's an amazing thing recently that the SBIR Reauthorization Act was passed. So that, for those of you that don't know, SBIR is a small business focused contracting mechanism available to the whole of government, saying, hey, spend R&D money with small businesses to help capture the innovation that exists there and then grow it. And what we saw in that was a multi-year authorization, and we also saw the creation of additional contracting authorities, so that as you go from the first phase to the second phase to scaling up phase to operationalizing, there's more money available for that. So we're creating structures and processes to help avoid the valleys of death for new technologies and startups to grow. And also recognizing that the government can work kind of hand in hand with venture and other capital formation tools to deliver those products and services. So those things are really amazing. And honestly, I think just putting more wood behind those kinds of arrows and smoothing out and driving more accessibility is what I would encourage.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. I love that. Well, Andrew, we kind of zipped through a lot of that. I really appreciate it. I think, I attribute that to a lot to your knowledge, and you just, how to answer a lot of these because you've been in the field for so long. But as we talk about the macro, as we talk about the background and everything else, thank you. One, that was incredibly helpful. But then two, I feel like we would be remiss, obviously, if we didn't talk about your current enterprise, obviously Starcatcher. I think we break this up into two. So, where can folks find you? But of course, let's start first with what are you doing at Starcatcher, if you can explain the business. I
Yeah.
think that would be super exciting, definitely for me, but for everybody else listening as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Starcatcher was founded to make it as easy to operate in space as it is to operate on the ground. And fundamentally, the way I think you accomplish that is you provide the same kinds of infrastructure that exists terrestrially anywhere people are living or working, and you make space versions of that. So think transportation infrastructure, telecommunication infrastructure, power infrastructure. Now, space, it really isn't any different there, except our roads are rockets, our telecommunications infrastructure are big dishes and AESAs, but there is not a power grid in space. The satellites are incredibly constrained. The average satellite in low Earth orbit has like 1,500 watts of power generation capacity on board, which, to put that in context for folks, that's about as much power as like my kid's gaming computer uses, or like my refrigerator uses. But in this modern world that we've been talking about, this space reliant world that we've been talking about, we ask our satellites to be cell phone towers in space for direct to cell connectivity. We're asking them to take high resolution imagery and then process that imagery and downlink it, or do radar from space. And now we're seeing more compute being put in space. And just one NVIDIA H100 chip needs 1,000 watts of power to drive it. And to say nothing of like the one rack in a data center that needs 60,000 watts, or
Right.
the entire data center, which is, megawatts or gigawatts. And then if we go a little further out, we start talking about manufacturing and doing research in space. Those are going to be very power dense, very power intense applications. And the same thing with human habitation. So all of these things, all these ambitions we have for space are fundamentally power constrained. And so what we're building at Starcatcher is a power grid for space, where we put up a constellation of satellites that beam energy to satellites' existing solar arrays and take advantage of the fact that if I put more light on those panels, they will generate more power in a roughly linear fashion. So I can take a 1,500 watt satellite, and I can make it a 5,000 watt satellite or 10,000 watt satellite. I can go from like, you know, gaming computer power to home power or small industrial park power, and then scale up from there. And take us from this world of power budgets in space to a world of power abundance. And, you know, for Starcatcher, for our customers, shift the power generation, the power procurement equation from an upfront CapEx cost into an OpEx cost. And make it easier for them to get their stuff up, make it cheaper for their satellite to be built, make it cheaper for it to be launched, make it simpler to put up, all of which we love as space people. And, you know, from a Starcatcher business perspective, create, you know, long-term, you know, sticky revenue streams, just like your local power utility. So that's what we're building at Starcatcher. We're about a 2-year-old company. We just recently announced a very sizable Series A.
I saw that. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
We raised $65 million. It was led by B Capital, by their growth fund, actually, and then co-led by Shield Capital, which is a really, really amazing defense and space tech focused venture capital firm, and then also co-led by Cerberus Ventures. And actually General J. Raymond, who was the founding general of the Space Force and a senior managing director at Cerberus, has now joined our board.
Oh, wow. Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
Wow. Congratulations. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah. Well, that's incredible. Andrew, thank you so much. One, for the background on everything high level. And of course, telling us what you have going on at Starcatcher. It's incredibly, I think, one, important, but then two, super exciting. I, like a lot of other folks, nerd out on this stuff, but there's a limit to how much I can nerd out on because my knowledge is limited. So it's always good to see, it's always good to have, I think, investors and corporates, public and private, come in and help explain what this new frontier means for the investment community, the investor community, and other companies out there. And again, this is such one and important, but then two, just like boundless potential for innovation. I think Starcatcher and what you, Andrew, are working on are a prime example of that. So super cool. Andrew, thank you again so much for the time, my friend. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Garrett.